and excited to be talking about a category that I know we both have a lot of passion for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks to all of those who are joining us virtually as well. Samir and I are really going to deep dive into this idea of modernizing a legacy brand. And I think, Samir, it probably makes sense when we think about where some of those big iconic brands are born is to take it to retail.
Sure.
And for me, at Freeosk, we are proponents of modernizing what the discovery experience can be in store. Because even though e-commerce has certainly been on the rise, it's still just a fraction of what's happening. Shoppers go in store, shoppers
Sure.
discovery in store. And we really believe in digitizing those discovery experiences, that discovery should be joyful and engaging and not necessarily at the expense of making it measurable for brands and really understanding those connection points that they have with their consumers. So when I think about my own experience with Clinique in retail, I think
Okay.
about high school. Mom takes me to the physical store, the department store that was like an hour and a half drive away, and I get to have everything tested on me, and I'm introduced to the three-step system. Talk to me about the brand and the role of the retail environment for you and how
Yeah.
you think about modernizing in store.
Sure. I mean, those are great questions, and starting in retail is exactly right because when you think about Clinique and you think about some of these big legacy iconic brands, a large part of what makes the brand special is because of the incredible, unique experiences that you used to be able to have when you walked the Clinique counter, just like you said, right? Like everybody I talk to about our brand is like, oh, I remember the time my mom first took me to that counter in my local Macy's or my Dillard's or my Belk. And so much of like the brand and what the brand means for people is about those moments of really special connection, right? If you think about that moment that you had with your mom, it was a mother-daughter moment of connection, her sharing something special with you about what the Clinique brand meant to her. And it was also potentially like a really special brand experience because you met with a consultant at the counter who was like super well educated on our products, who could really understand your skin, help you think about it differently, and gave you really valuable insight into our products and your skin, right? And in today's world, so much of our identity as Clinique was linked to department stores, right? Like that, it's really hard to separate the idea of what do people think of Clinique from what they thought of the Clinique counter. And so it's a big challenge for us as we think about how the world of retail has evolved, both in terms of people's expectations, the channels that they're shopping in, and how we bring that same level of experience. And when we took a step back for our brand, that we really thought about like what was really fundamental about that experience that you had at the counter and that other people had. And it really was about two things. It was really about first education, right? Clinique has been a brand that helped demystify skincare and makeup throughout its history by educating consumers about what our products can do, how to use them. So the three-step system is a great example of like, it's just simple, 1, 2, 3. And then the second part of it is really skin diagnosis, right? Really trying to get people to understand what is it about your skin specifically that's going on, and what are the right products for your skin specifically that we can solve those issues. So if you think about modernizing those two aspects of the experience, Delaney, getting to your question, it's like, when it comes to education, one of the things we try to do is just create more ways that consumers can interact with education content, right? And so COVID has been really interesting for us, right? Whether it be creating a whole system of live streaming that we consistently are doing with our expert makeup artists, our expert consultants that can do that so people can access those things. We've created one-to-one connections on our website so people can actually like live chat, obviously, with people and say like, hey, I've got this question. Can you help me understand it? And then when it comes to like skin diagnosis, we've done a lot of work to actually digitize the experience, right? Like, I don't know if you guys have, some people might remember, we have this famous thing we talk about, the abacus, which is like the sliding scale of diagnosis. But now we have like a completely digitized app called Clinical Reality where you can actually do a skin scan via your phone, and you can do it via iPads in store. And so we've integrated that on QR codes at different shelving units in different stores where there aren't people to help you. We've got the iPads in store for you to do it yourself if you're in those stores. So we've really tried to go back to those two fundamentals of education and diagnosis and really try to like digitize them and give people greater access to them. So that way they can get the information they want the way they want it, and still comes from Clinique as a brand that is there to support you and go through your sort of skincare and makeup journey.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think seeing how the beauty industry has adapted and adopted digital has been really interesting. And for us, we saw that certainly in the uptick during COVID, where digital and the sampling and the safe sampling became so important for shoppers. And I'll tell you, I saw just recently that Clinique got into the NFT game. I didn't ever, who knew? And so when you think about competing against direct to consumer brands who have traditionally been the ones who have a little bit more swagger in the social space. How does a brand with so much, iconic heritage show up in those channels authentically? And how are you thinking about bringing that brand to life?
Yeah, it's a really tremendous challenge for us, actually, if I'm being really transparent. And the reason it's challenging is for a few reasons. I think, like a lot of brands out there, right? Like, we have among beauty brands the highest aided awareness of any beauty brand. So everybody knows Clinique or is aware of Clinique. If you ask them about Clinique, they'll have something to say relative to other beauty brands. The other thing, though, that we have is this interesting duality where some people think of us as their mom's brand, right? They think like, oh, that's the brand that my mom used their entire lives. And then we also have women who tell us that, like, oh, I always think of Clinique as being like young and playful and not for me. And so because our portfolio is so broad, right? Like, we're really spanning people entering skincare and makeup at 16 or 17, or even younger in some cases, to women in their 70s and 80s that are trying to maintain like their radiant skin. We've got to be very targeted around leveraging digital and social to drive relevance with very specific audiences, right? And so I'll share a couple of examples, and the NFT one is a great one, right? Like, if you think about NFTs, you're like, well, first of all, why is a beauty brand talking about NFTs and what value can we add? But we really were using that as a way to think about how we drive loyalty and also get people to rethink what Clinique is, right? Like, it's really a earned media play in a lot of ways to get people to say like, oh, Clinique is much more modern, and I never would have thought of Clinique as being associated with NFTs. And then, like, what is this interesting program they've created? Let me see if I can re-engage with the brand. And a couple of other examples like that, where we're trying to be very specific with specific audiences, is like, we've, like, similar to actually what Stephanie was just talking about in the last session, we've done a ton of work on TikTok as of late, as an example, right? Really trying to drive relevance with Gen Z, whether that be picking up on viral trends where our products have started to take off on their own, like our Black Honey lipstick, which is like an iconic 50-year-old lipstick that all of a sudden over the last 3 months has exploded on TikTok, partly on its own, and then partly through some things that we've done to facilitate that. Or like doing things with like acne, with a campaign we did called Zit Happens on TikTok, which got like 9 billion views in 3 weeks. So what we've tried to really do is segment, obviously, and this is classic marketing, like, think about our audiences, think about where they are, think about what their sources of influences are, and then really go deep, right? And really go deep into monitoring what they're doing, what conversations they're having, and try to make sure that we're as relevant as possible for those audiences as we segment them. And it's interesting because in beauty, people's skins, we talk about life stages, right, in life, but people's skin fundamentally changes over time, right? So it creates real opportunity for us to like be relevant in key moments in different ways because their skin is fundamentally different, right? So yeah.
Well, I know from your background, you've also worked on other beauty brands. So just speaking of skin, what have you learned about your own skin and your own experiences, Samir? Have you had any?
So one of the things that I have appreciated in this role more than any other is the complexity of makeup. So first of all, like, I'm currently not wearing any makeup, but I know that I could be wearing 7 layers of primer, foundation, finishing powders, setting powders, mapping my T-zone, and multiple lip liners and lipsticks. So, I think I've gotten to a very distinct appreciation for the complexity of makeup is one thing. I definitely am an oily, dry combo skin type. And so I'm a big believer in SPF. So every day I use one of our SPF moisturizers to make sure I maintain a healthy glow. But yeah, it's my skin is a unique challenge unto itself, which is true for everybody. So yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. And I can appreciate what consumers do with makeup on TikTok. I feel like I'm constantly inspired, especially by the younger generation and how they approach makeup and how they use it to express their creative side.
Well, and it's interesting. We're in a really interesting moment because COVID, as I'm sure, has been a massive disruption for everybody. COVID has actually really changed the game in terms of dynamics because 2 things have happened. I think from a consumer and what they're looking for, some consumers are actually really taking COVID as a moment where they really took better care of their skin and focused on skincare and self-care. And so as they re-enter makeup, they want more natural looks, more healthy foundation and makeup products, which is actually really good for Clinique. But then there's also people who've gone like, oh, well, I'm back to makeup post-COVID. I want to be really expressive. Like, I want to exaggerate everything. So I want to go for like artist looks, and they use the stuff you see on TikTok of like full animal makeup or incredible makeup removal videos of layers of makeup that instantly disappear. It's an incredible platform in terms of just bringing beauty to life in a super dynamic, fun, playful way. And it really brings the joy of beauty and makeup to life. So it's a really incredible platform for us. So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So thinking about, and by the way, Black Honey is the best. It was,
I
think, part of my core lineup if samples ever happen, we need to get them into the Freeosk.
So yeah, it's interesting. And actually, I want to talk about this point about sampling, actually, because you asked about experience in digital social. Sampling has also been like a really, really interesting challenge over the last couple of years, because to your point, like the ability to measure the impact of samples is sometimes so hard. And, the beauty experience of shopping is often about touching and feeling and smelling the products as much as it is about believing that what it will deliver in terms of efficacy, depending on the category. And so our ability to distribute samples and be creative about that has been a big part of, I think, has been helped us come out of COVID. Because it's been like super important. And Black honey is a great example. Like our promise on Black honey is that it will look good on virtually any skin tone. And so getting people to believe that and experience that, TikTok helped to visualize it for people in a really authentic way, but also sampling it and getting it out in different promotional programs is super important for us as well.
100%. Yeah. I mean, as a category, it is all about the senses. It is one of the few that you can do a lot of things in digital, but nothing can replicate experiencing the product and getting your hands on it. But as it relates to samples, so my only gripe that I've ever had about CLINIQUE in the early years, so if I think back to high school and I was an avid buyer, I remember getting samples that maybe didn't match my skin tone.
Sure.
And it was a friend of mine from high school who reminded me that I used to always give her my samples. That's the pink was maybe too pink for my skin tone, and coincidentally, she ended up going on to Sephora and managed customer acquisition. Rachel, my friend Rachel, and she, when we were chatting at our reunion not too long ago, she mentioned this and how she carried that consumer insight and have won with her even at Sephora because she remembers like the pain and kind of disappointment I felt. And so what we've discovered through our consumer research is very often those well-intended brand moments of giving out samples that are supposed to be surprise and delight actually turn out to be really disappointing and emotional for consumers if it's not targeted, if it's not relevant, if it's not contextual, if it's not them pulling it to you. And so she was just chatting about how retailers have been thinking about the products and diversifying. So how is Clinique modernizing? Because I know that that's been an area that you guys have really leaned into.
Yeah, so I have so much to say here, and it's a real passion point for the team and for me. And there's a couple things I just want to highlight from a sort of a history perspective, because in a macro context perspective, like when you think about beauty and you think about skincare and you think about makeup, right? Like fundamentally, these categories are about identity, right? So like every brand and every community should be thinking about diversity and inclusion, but like skincare and beauty are among the most personal because they really are about talking about and shaping how you want to project your own personal self-image into the world and how you want to enter the world and interact with people and fundamentally your appearance. So skincare, so diversity in that context is super complicated and super sensitive. And, I think that we are the number one prestige beauty brand out there, like I think we're a big part of what is either good or bad about the industry. And so we've taken it on, particularly over the last 2 years where I've been at Clinique, I think a real belief that we have an obligation to improve the conversation around what the beauty industry is or is not doing in terms of diversity, either directly in terms of the programs that we do, or indirectly because of things like maybe not having the right sampling that speaks to diverse consumers. And so we've really been on like a multi-year journey of trying to figure out what are the things that we need to do across the consumer experience to improve this. And so part of my team, actually, even a little bit before I got here, had really started this big effort in stores to actually work with our consultants for them to better understand, to better have empathy, to better understand how to talk about skin and skin needs when a customer came in with different skin tones or different melanin-rich skin or whatever it might be, just to make sure that like we could create a sense of comfort and spoke the same language. So that was like part one. The other part of it was the thing that we always hear, and I think many brands hear, is about representation, right? Like if you'd gone to a Clinique counter, let's say 10 years ago, the models and the images of women would have been pristine, beautiful, but they may not have been as diverse as the people shopping those stores. And so we've been on a big push to make sure that representation is a big part of the look and feel of the brand. And to the point where like, even like when we do foundation advertising, for example, we lead with darker shades to overcompensate and definitely show that we want people to see themselves in our brand and that we have products for them. And then the part of it is product development, right? Making sure that we have the right foundation shades that meet multiple skin tones where people don't have to mix shades to get to the right skin tone for them, whether it be somebody like yourself of like South Asian descent or somebody who's African-American or somebody who's Latina. And all of those groups, by the way, have various skin tones within them, right? So like they're not singular. singular groups. And so part of it was the product piece, and also making sure that we have testing to make sure that they work for those skin tones. And then thirdly is getting to kind of the marketing fundamentals of deep human insights and understanding the needs and emotionality that go with the consumer needs that we want to meet for those consumers. So like recently we just launched a new campaign around hyperpigmentation and even skin tone. And for anybody who's from who's African American or Latino or even South Asian will relate to the fact that like uneven skin tone is the number one skin need of consumers with melanin rich or darker skin. But we weren't necessarily addressing it as the number one need that we could meet. And so we've really shifted our paradigm of focus there, that for those consumers, we're really going to go deep on that specific need. And we just launched a whole new campaign that is squarely targeted at African American and Latina consumers. It's based on the emotions and the feelings that they have associated with that concern and some of the confusion out there around it, where it's almost as emotional, or it's actually even more emotional in some cases than like an acne for like a 16-year-old girl. And when we started equating the two and understanding that, then it started to unlock all of these possibilities around how we could approach it and the role that we could play in reducing the confusion, reducing the concern, and making people feel less lonely about and isolated in terms of what their skin was doing. And so we're really excited about some of the programs that we started to launch in that area. But that whole journey, though, is really about diversity and inclusion and really making sure that people see themselves represented in the brand. And the brand isn't just showing them in the work, but actually speaking to them in a way that they actually want to react and feel like the brand understands them. And so, which I know a lot of brands are working on. So yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like for you, I mean, I think as great product innovation is rooted in a human truth and a consumer truth, and getting to that core insight and then carrying it through to the campaign. So I know, Samir, that there's Clinique is now available in other outlets. And so from a consumer insights perspective, what else have you learned about your shopper base if you've become available in other areas?
Yeah, it's super interesting. So if you think about it, I always think about like I feel like the age that we're in right now is like the great blurring, is the way I kind of talk about it, because it feels like we've got distribution channels blurring, right? Like it used to be that in beauty, there was prestige and there was mass, right? And that those were definitive worlds. They were very different in terms of like who shopped there, what the stores were, where they were located. And from a distribution standpoint, I feel like we are in the great blurring. Like we're now in Ulta, we're now in Sephora, and a lot of those channels, and even now we're in Target through Ulta Beauty at Target, and Kohl's, we're in Kohl's through Sephora at Kohl's. And so there's this great blurring of distribution where what is prestige and what is mass is different. And so I think what we've learned in that experience of going to different distribution channels where they have different kind of staffing models in terms of the level of support that people can get there. People have different expectations of how fast they can get in and out of those stores. And they have different expectations of what the level of like the experience really could be, like in terms of what can I buy online when I'm in store and all of that. And so what we've tried to do is really be agnostic, right? And so we really want to make sure that when you're in a store which has very little staffing, that the Clinique point of difference around efficacious products and safe products comes through very clearly, and really bring the best of the mass experience in terms of ease of self-shopping to life. So if you go into an Ulta, we have a really big portfolio in Ulta, and they're a really important account for us, but there's often not somebody staffed there to help you navigate it. So we've got to make that as easy as possible, while also giving consumers the opportunity that if they do want to scan a QR code for skin diagnostic, like I talked about earlier, or get in touch with somebody who wants to give them a direct experience on what they need, that they can do that. So I think what we've learned is that consumers' expectations around their shopping experience is really tied to that different distribution channel, and that we've got to adjust and pivot what the Clinique experience is within that context, so people can feel good that they can go into an Ulta faster, versus if they're on like a Saturday afternoon relaxing and enjoying a mall experience and want to like linger in a Macy's, they can also do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And then as you think about, that's all more data, it sounds like, and how do you start to connect the as it starts to proliferate? Have you had any kind of ahas in that experience?
And sorry, Delini, you broke up for 1 second there. I didn't catch actually all of that question. Can you say it one more time? Tyler, did you
looks like we are having a little technical difficulty.
Okay, Tyler, did you lose Delini or is it me?
No, I lost her as well. Or
okay,
at least she's frozen, looking like she's about to take a nap.
Okay, so how are you doing, Tyler?
I am good. Yeah, I guess to continue, I guess on some of that, I think she was, going with, the in-store and you were talking about how getting that
Yeah.
help, but like, how are you continuing to move and create performance and growth with these new channels and new ventures within the
Yeah.
in-store?
Yeah, there's been a lot of different things that we've been experimenting. I mean, I think one of the things, and I'm sure it's come up as a theme throughout the sessions today, and I think I heard Stephanie talk about it a little bit before this one, like this idea around continuous improvement and experimentation around everything we can do to drive performance marketing has been a big part of our ethos. And so I'm a big believer in kind of the 70-20-10 rule of like 10% pilots, 20% scaled pilots, 70% proven drivers. And so to that end, there's a lot of different things happening with our distribution channels that allow us to drive experimentation and growth. So one is we're seeing a lot of our retail partners develop first-party data platforms and media platforms. Yep. And so we've been spending a lot of time experimenting with them on how can we use those to drive super efficient acquisition, as well as super efficient and personalized, customized CRM programs, right? So whether, Tyler, I don't know, it seems like you're probably, from looking at your skin, a big beauty guy yourself. So, when somebody buys moisturizer, right? Like what is the right next likely item that we should be promoting to them or getting them to add to their basket? And what is that frequency and cadence of those things? And then using those first party data platforms that they've given us access to like make sure that that we're only spending those dollars on the most effective audience has been one big part of how we've been trying to leverage the insight and the diversity of our distribution to our benefit.
Do they share that performance data or that CRM with you?
Depending on every retailer is obviously very different, and data continues to be like a very sensitive topic as everybody's sort of ramping up their capabilities, as well as people are trying to figure out the best way to monetize it for themselves. But usually with some of our big partners, like as we execute programs with them, they share back a lot of great data with us, partly out of an incentive for us to invest more, right? And I always say to the retail partners the same thing that I say to almost anybody, which is, it's a zero-sum game of dollars. The question is, should I be spending them with you or should I be spending them on my own? And on my own, I know what I'm going to get. But if I can get the ROI and you can show me that the ROI is greater with you, then I'm happy to take it out of other buckets of money, whether it be my national social or my digital or my display media, and put it on first party platforms because I know that the ROI is going to get stronger. So I try to be objectively like ROI neutral, even when there's things that like you might be surprised about. Like I can tell you with one of our retail partners, you're going to find this entertaining, is fragrant. We do something called fragrance blow-ins, which is like little inserts in magazines with like scented strips.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And as a relatively modern marketer, I would have been like, that's a terrible spend. Like, why are we doing that? And then actually, when we had an opportunity to measure it, you'd be like shocked. And it goes back to kind of the sampling discussions, Lainey. Like, those are incredibly high ROI drivers. And so, even though my bias as a modern digital marketer would have been to be like, that's old school, when you actually get an opportunity to measure it, you're like, oh, I've got to be objective about it and go after it. So, so we continue to invest in those things because they drive. So it's interesting.
Awesome. Yes, it's been a long time since I've seen one of those, but I'm glad they still work.
And it was a funny interaction with my team because I was like, "This is a bad spend, guys," and they're like,
"Right."
So,
it reminds me of the late '90s more than anything. But Delaney, it looks like you're back, and the technical difficulty is passed. So I will pass it back over to you. Oh, you're still on mute. I'm happy when that phrase is hopefully past us.
You would think after as long as we've been in this, I would have this figured out. So I was just saying thank you, Tyler, for jumping in there and, awesome. And apologies. But so we think about, looking ahead for you, Samir, and what gets you excited about the future of the category.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you just like, if you indulge me for just a second, like why I love beauty. Because I think you and I, as we were preparing for this, you asked me like, how'd you end up in beauty? And I was like, to be honest with you, I have no idea. Like, I was like, I'm not like a beauty guy per se. And, but I love the complexity of this business, right? Like there's like a real joy in the diversity of competitors, right? From heritage brands like Lancome and Estee Lauder that are my competitors to DTC brands like Glossier to indie brands like Drunk Elephant. Like there's a really incredible plethora of competitors. And then they're all obviously this evolving distribution dynamic that makes our team makes our business really interesting. So as I look ahead to the future, I want Clinique to be the most, actually the way I think about it, here's one way for me to think about it. Like, I don't know if you're a tennis fan. Are you a tennis fan at all? No? Okay. There used to be two schools.
A fair question. I feel like most of my South Asian friends are, but I am not.
So there used to be two games of tennis, right? There used to be the baseliners and the serve and volleyers. And Pete Sampras, the old pride of Roger Federer, the greatest of all time, used to say, I want to be a better baseliner than the best servant volleyer, and I want to be a better servant volleyer than the best baseliner.
Sure.
And I think what that really speaks to is this idea that to be great, sometimes it has to be an incredible balance of really different skill sets at the right level. And so when you think about an iconic #1 brand trying to stay relevant and constantly having a lot of little brands chip away at our potential, or trying to chip away at our market share, there's a few things that I get really excited about. #1 is, I think, getting to that point of really deep human relevance across very diverse consumer groups. So like I talked about Gen Z. I mean, the fact that we have 17-year-olds walking into an Ulta and being like, do you guys have black honey in stock? And that is a lipstick that was developed in 1971 in like a little jar, right? Like that's an incredible opportunity as a brand, right? To say, how do I capitalize on that moment to say that Clinique is for you as a 17-year-old? That never would have happened in an environment without TikTok 5 years ago. So I get really excited about capitalizing on that opportunity. I'm definitely very excited about the opportunity that we have ahead of us in terms of like diversity, because I do think that there's a broad perception out there that we are still a brand for Caucasian women. And I think most people would be like, why is there an Indian man leading the marketing for this team? And when I look at the work that we're doing lately, I have greater and greater belief that we have an opportunity to drive really deep, rich emotional connection with women of color of all backgrounds, but particularly Latinas and African Americans, where they want to believe that Clinique is for them and they have very positive associations with the brand, but we haven't done enough in terms of outreach. So I think that's coming. And then the last piece is when we think about the future of beauty, right? The beauty of beauty is definitely diversity of experiences, right? Like it's like every retailer, every brand has virtual try on. Everybody's trying to do different things in terms of bringing the experience of being in store to different places. And I don't think we know what's going to stick yet, if I'm being honest, right? I don't think we know what are the things that are really going to drive real engagement. So I think continuing to experiment on things like NFTs or other digital experiences that, and seeing what people want to engage with to discover us, I think is going to be something that I'm super excited about. So there's a lot in front of us that I couldn't be more excited about, to be honest. So yeah.
It's interesting because it's almost an advantage for you to not be the consumer, in the sense that I think, for many CPG marketers will work in industries that we're not the consumer of, and you have to build empathy for your user, because otherwise you might be biased by your own experiences. And so I think, as you were mentioning, putting the human truth, at the center.
It's so interesting actually that you say that, because from like just like a team management and team leadership perspective, because one of the things that obviously we want to try and foster in our team is a real passion for beauty, right? Where people are constantly talking about what was the latest brand they discovered, why do they love it, like what is it, like why, how are they using it, all this stuff. So we do a lot of like sharing every week or every other week on like what is somebody's favorite beauty brands or favorite beauty products and why. And like it's a great education for the team because there's such diversity of competitors out there. Every day somebody says to me, have you heard of this brand that recently launched? And I'll be like, no, I haven't, because there's so much out there. And but then taking that to your point, like going back to that idea of like, for me to objectively say, well, I don't use a brow applicator. So what is the point of art? Probably that. Yeah, I probably will be soon. But, but then getting to like the point of difference of like, well, why are we better? Why are we different? And going back to some of those fundamental questions that we all ask ourselves as marketers, when you're not as like deeply enmeshed in using them, it's a great compliment to have a team of beauty fanatics. And then having somebody who can then ask like the more objective questions and bring those things together as we think about our strategies. And so that's been like a really nice thing. I think it just like, hopefully I bring that to the team, and the team brings so much more to me. And together we can figure it out. So it's been really nice.
So you mentioned a couple of the things that get you excited. Yeah. And I love that, the challenge is just having all the young brands coming in and it sort of just brings new and constant energy to the category. But what keeps you up at night? What are the
So depending on who's in the audience, I will say that the biggest risk that I talk about with Clinique is if we're not careful, and this is going to sound like, I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but if we're not careful, we could end up being like the Cadillac of skincare and makeup, where at one point people had such a sense of aspiration associated with our brand, right? Like again, going back to that counter experience, right? Like it was a real moment for people to go to the counter with their moms and experience Clinique, or even for women going on their own to get the advice of a consultant. And it felt like so much in terms of accomplishments and empowerment and all of those things But if we're not careful, the thing that keeps me up at night is that we will get superseded by brands that are being much more relevant, much more innovative in their products, and much less tied to a glorious past than we are. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to do as a team culturally is just stay super hungry and focused on the fact that no matter how big we are, or no matter what our lead is in the category, that we've got to be hungry and paranoid about who's coming after us, because it's a real threat, right? And so being really honest with ourselves about what we do well and what our capabilities are and what capabilities we need to build. But that's what that's what really fundamentally at the highest level worries me. And you know, we're lucky to be part of a large company with a healthy amount of resources, but sometimes it's the brands that are younger and scrappier and that more that move faster that can get there. That's why with some of the stuff we're doing on TikTok, I'm really proud of, and some of the other things. But that's the thing that I worry about more than anything else. But hopefully we're doing the right things to defend that challenge. So
yeah. Something when you mentioned about the honey pot and the gloss.
Yeah.
When I think about Clinique products, I can think of the way the products feel, that like very specific yellow Pantone of the lotion and the colors. And so as the brand has evolved, as you're thinking about modernizing this iconic brand, what are the things that you are really holding true and need to stay consistent versus what are the things that are on the table to, evolve?
So if you think about like Clinique's brand codes are super interesting. And actually when I started, there's a lot of them actually. There's so there are iconic products like dramatically different lotion, which looks very yellow, which everybody remembers. There's our high impact mascara or black honey. Like when you ask people about that, they're like, that was my first mascara. That was my first lipstick. I love that. But one of the things that I think the brand has fundamentally always been about is like in a sea of stories around beauty, we have been a brand that is born from the lab and really driving true efficacy. And I think one of the things that we're seeing from competitors and the whole industry is the bar for proving efficacy will be something that we always have to hold true. And that bar is continually raised. And so you're gonna continually see us talk about, unique ingredients, unique claims that prove out those ingredients, visuals that bring the proof of efficacy to life. And so I think that idea around efficacy is gonna be really important. Yeah. The other part of one of our fundamental brand pillars has always been about safety, right? Whether it be no parabens, no phthalates, no fragrance, allergy tested. I think in today's world in beauty, sensitivity and skin sensitivity, I think people like, just like there's like allergies in food, skin sensitivity is actually like a real phenomenon. And if you look in like mass, for example, in cleansing, 10 years ago when I worked at another beauty company, the number one cleansing brand was Neutrogena. Today, the top 5 items in the top 10 in cleansing are Cetaphil and CeraVe, like super gentle, ultra gentle cleansers. And the reason for that is because I think there is a lot more insight for people around like, what are the things that irritate my skin or aggravate my skin? And so product safety and efficacy and that combination is something that we can uniquely deliver in, I think, a really differentiated way. So that's going to continue to be a big focus for us as well in terms of brand codes that we're always going to reinforce.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Even the NFT that I saw, absolutely captured the beauty and the elegance, but the sort of approachability of the brand, and had that dynamic nature to it.
So actually, that actually does speak to one other brand code, which is we always think of ourselves as like opening price point prestige, which again, in the great blurring of prestige and mass and the marketplace, it means a little bit less, but we always have tried to aspire to have things that make us feel like a luxury product in a lot of different ways. And the NFT is a good example of that, but also make sure that we are accessible, whether it's our tonality or wit or humor, and making sure that comes through. And so I think that's something that'll always be there for us as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So in these last couple of minutes, for those that are listening in, how do you want them to think about your brand differently? Is there anything that you want them to go pick up and give to a friend or as we think about modernizing and the next time they see Clinique?
Well, I'm hoping the next time they see Clinique, they say, that is a brand for me. And so the products, if I were to tell you, go out and buy this, right? I think it depends on who you are, right? But I think Moisture Surge is one of our phenomenal moisturizers that's completely different and often not our yellow lotion. That is a big growth opportunity for us. And if you are a woman who suffers from uneven skin tone or a man, our Even Better Clinical Interrupter Dark Spot Corrector is a phenomenal product. But no, I think more than anything else, when I think about when people think about Clinique, what do I want them to associate with us? I want them to think about like the joy and optimism that they can bring. Like, actually, here, let me say this differently. If you ever ask somebody about a good hair day, and then if you also ask them about a good skin day, they say the same thing. The way in which they approach the world in terms of a sense of optimism and belief in terms of what they can do when they have a good skin day is super powerful. And so more than anything else, I want people, when they go to Clinique or think of Clinique, they think about like, wow, think about all the things I can accomplish with this brand, because I believe in having like a better and optimistic future. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do from an equity standpoint, but obviously a huge lofty aspiration. So yeah.
I'm glad you reminded me about the men's care line. I missed the piece with Tyler, but hopefully you were able to give him some tips for his skincare routine as well.
We only had so much time, so I couldn't fully get into Tyler's grooming tips, but there's a
couple
of
lot of
things
help.
through my head.
I need a lot of help.
One thing that we unlocked in our research, what I found really interesting, is that men actually really do have a strong preference for in-store sampling across different categories.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Tyler, next time you're out and about at your
See, I just gray the facial hair, so
just cover up the problem.
Cover it up, you know.
We've got great shaving products, actually, surprisingly. Our shave products are amazing. So if you're ever doing some cleanup and maintenance, Tyler,
okay,
for men could be for you.
Away from the screen.
Yeah.
Now I'm self-conscious about my skincare routine. I definitely need the moisturizing. I think that's where I'm going to start. Right now, I think my entire skincare regime is sunblock. So
well, that's good. Actually, that's a great place to start. We would never say that's bad. So SPF is critical. So good.
Well, great. We still have a few minutes. Are there, any questions from the audience? We'd love to see if there's anything out there that people are dying to ask.
Anything? Quiet group in late afternoon.
Yeah, the Friday,
Yeah.
Post lunch spot. It was interesting how you guys are focused on the individual. It felt like a lot, with utilizing the first party data, with putting more focus on skin tones. Is there a way to match that up from a creative standpoint? Are you utilizing that data in the creative assets?
Yeah, we've done a couple of interesting things there, I think, Tyler. So one is we've actually done a lot of experimentation with dynamic creative, which is less about skin tone, but we have done a lot around what are some of the different ways that our products can be applied to people's lives. So if you take a moisturizer like Moisture Surge 100, which is like a deep hydration product, how we talk about that in the context of either weather or pollution or blue light or whatever it might be. We've done a lot of work with dynamic creative and seen really great results with, like, when you give people the option and optimize the creative based on that. And then when we think about diversity, for sure, you're going to see much better and actually a lot more. And you've seen a lot of it over the last few years of us really trying to be very disciplined about what are the skin tones we show, what are the shades we show of our products. So we're signaling consistently to people that we are a brand for your skin tone. And then you'll see in our latest campaign that I was just talking about, if anybody goes to like birdie.com, if they read that beauty and fashion site, we talk a lot about the language around from melanin rich to fair skin, which is really important language, right? When you talk to this consumer around signaling that these products are for them. So our creative has started to pick up on some of those language cues as well as visual cues that allow people to see more of themselves and more of how they think about their skin in the creative. So to your point, Tyler, we definitely try to customize that as much as we can, and do it as dynamically as we can in certain cases. So yeah.
No, that's great. I think it kind of leads into, we're now getting the questions, which is great. I need to prompt this more often. But even with diversity, but going into influencers, are you guys getting into influencer category? How are you guys using them? And what's working? So
influencers are pivotal to our strategy, whether they be TikTok creators or whether they be traditional influencers or whether they're micro influencers. And so we do a lot of different things with influencers across different initiatives. I will say that we as a brand have done more in terms of like campaign-based influencer relationships rather than having a singular influencer or a collection of influencers that we use consistently. And the reason for that is that sometimes we worry about having too much of our equity tied to like specific individuals. And so we prefer to have a broader array of influencers that are having certain conversations. So like I'll tell you, like for an acne campaign we recently did, we found TikTok creators and influencers that were having an acne positivity conversation. which is actually the exact conversation that we wanted to be part of because it spoke to our sense of optimism and belief. And so we're doing a ton with influencers, but those are the ones that we targeted. So we tend to go, depending on the initiative, try to be very specific about who and why we're picking the influencers and how they reinforce, I think, the equity message as well as the social conversation that we want to have and be associated with.
I was reading, I saw a Euromonitor stat that